Welcome to the Organic Wine Podcast. I'm Adam Huss, coming to you from Los Angeles, California. Thanks so much for listening. The sponsor for this episode is Centralis Wine. Centralis is an ecological winery that I started to protect or benefit the environment and my community with every business and winemaking decision. I envision a wine world in which humans are the students and servants of the non-human world, regenerating and protecting the vitality of ecosystems and promoting the diversity of life through wines that uniquely and deliciously reflect local abundance. Centralis wines feature foraged prickly pears, urban perennial polyculture wine garden produced grapes and other fruit, gleanings from urban fruit trees, dry farmed century-old vines, and organic and biodynamic viticulture. If this sounds interesting to you, join our email list or wine club at centraliswine.com. That's CENTRALAS wine.com. For this episode, I had the pleasure of talking with Kendra Knapik of Ellison Estate Vineyard, a vineyard of American grapes on Grand Isle in the middle of Lake Champlain, Vermont. Kendra and her husband Rob practice animal grazing integrated regenerative viticulture with a flock of sheep and organic practices, and they make an array of natural wines. We talk about all this, and Kendra talks about the joys and challenges of embracing the life of a wine grower while having young children in a full-time job, in her case as a veterinary oncologist. As hard as you can tell she works, you can also hear in her voice that she's fueled by the beauty of what she's doing. The process is as impressive to me as what she's building, and one more piece of evidence that Vermont is a hotspot for some really cool winemaking. Enjoy. Kendra, welcome. Thanks for doing this.
Thanks for having me, Adam.
It's a real pleasure to talk to you, and I would love to start by you just sort of telling us where you are in the world.
Well, right now I'm in Grand Isle, Vermont, and I'm on my vineyard, which is on the east side of an island in northern Vermont.
That's
So it's
the
called the
Grand
Lake
Isle.
Champlain Islands. Yeah.
So is Grand Isle the name of the island? Or is
So
that the name of the town on the island?
there's a couple islands. So Grand Isle is actually the northern part of a bigger island. The southern part is South Hero. I believe the entire island is actually called South Hero Island.
Okay.
But there's an area north of Burlington in Vermont called the Lake Champlain Islands, which consists of South Hero, North Hero, Grand Isle, Islemont, and Alberg, which is actually not an island at all. It's a peninsula off of Canada. But it's a very unique and kind of undiscovered place in Vermont that is just stunningly beautiful. My mom grew up in Alberg. So I spent a lot of time here growing up. So it's a special place for me.
What is the name of what you're doing?
So our vineyard is called Ellison Estate Vineyard. And so my husband and I purchased this farm about 4 years ago. And
How big is it?
so it's a 50-acre farm, and we have 10.3 acres of grapevines.
Okay.
When we initially so it used to be called East Shore Vineyard, and it's one of the older, larger vineyards that were planted in Vermont. Kind of first wave of bigger vineyards that got planted in Vermont were in the late 90s, early 2000s. So Lincoln Peak Vineyard, Shelburne Vineyard, and East Shore Vineyard was one of those vineyards. It was planted by Bob and Linda Livingstone. So it was a vineyard that when we came across it, which is kind of a long story, but was abandoned for a little over a year. It wasn't pruned the previous year. It was probably some reduced management before that. And somehow we made a crazy life decision to purchase it. Yeah.
That's amazing. So, well, why was it a crazy life decision? What was going on in your life?
My background is that I'm a veterinary oncologist. I'm originally from Vermont and moved back here in 2011 after living other places for a while. And I moved back to take a job as the first veterinary oncologist in the state. My husband is a physicist and particle physicist. So we have zero background in viticulture and enology, with the exception of I took a course in college years and years ago, and just fell in love with wine. And the long story short, basically, moved back to Vermont for professional jobs. Really both enjoy our jobs, but we started having kids, and I unfortunately just had like zero flexibility with my job. I worked really long hours. I was on call all the time, and as happens when you have kids, you kind of reevaluate what is important to you. And I realized quickly that I just couldn't really be there for my kids in the way that I wanted to be. So I went part-time. And then after working part-time for a while, I kind of took a look at my life and kind of reassess, like, where do I want to be in 10 to 15 years? Is this working for me? And I realized that there was just something missing for me. And I really wanted to build something. And I realized that I wanted to start my own business. And I think another big part was there was a big kind of creative side to my personality that just I wasn't really able to exercise in my current job. And so I started to just explore different options for starting a business. And we considered pretty seriously starting an ice cream business for a while. And since moving back to Vermont, I had noticed just vineyards around the state. And I actually went to college in the Finger Lakes region in New York. And so I knew a little bit about cold climate viticulture. And coming back, there was kind of this question in the back of my mind, like, could Burlington be like Ithaca, as far
Absolutely,
as
yeah.
like a wine industry. And
Around a lake sort of situation, right?
right. So that
You're
was just
talking
kind
about
of like a
the Finger
question.
Lakes.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
You're talking about the Finger Lakes,
Yeah,
right?
Finger Lakes region. Yeah,
Ithaca.
yeah. So I graduated college in like 2003, and I think their kind of industry was taking off. I think it's changed a lot since then, and grown a lot. But yeah, so I had that kind of question in the back of my mind. Like, wine was just like a hobby, and like I think kind of part of my husband and my culture. We met in grad school, and just after I took this wine course in college, and just I was like the geeky kid that, stayed up late at the library studying wine regions. Um, Probably one of the 10 kids that took it seriously. I just found wine fascinating, and I loved learning about different varieties, different regions. And my husband and I just love to taste. And, again, it was just part of our kind of culture. And so as I was thinking about what we were going to do with our lives, or what I was going to do with my life, my husband is still a full-time professor. Wine came up, and I remember I was actually at a good friend's 40th birthday at a winery outside of Annapolis, Doden Winery. I don't know if you've heard of it, but
No.
it's a great winery. And
Is that Annapolis, Maryland?
yeah, so I
Okay.
believe Doden's in Maryland, not Virginia. And yeah, so I met the owner, who was a retired physician, and I just remember him, giving me a tour of the winery and the vineyard. And, I just found it like something just clicked, and thought it was just what a cool job, just all the different facets between the vineyard, the winery, running the business. And I remember I like called my husband. He was taking a ice cream course at Penn State that same weekend. And I was like, I had noticed over the years that occasionally UVM offered a viticulture course, the University of Vermont. And so I like got online, and that course was offered for that summer. And I was like, I'm going to take this viticulture course. Like, maybe we should start a vineyard. And so I signed up for that course, and basically we found out about this property through the course.
Oh,
It was
wow.
actually like the first day of the course. I was pregnant with my third kid. So I was like the pregnant lady in the wine course and with a bunch of undergrads. But the professor, who's a friend of mine, he asked the first day of the class, he said, he said, if you were going to plant a vineyard in Vermont, where would you plant it? And I said, well, I would plant it up in the Lake Champlain Islands. It's more temperate because of the lake effects. I want my fruit to really be able to ripen because there's obviously limitations in a cold climate. And he goes, I know this guy in Grand Isle that wants to sell his vineyard. Are you interested? And I was like, sure. I obviously have a family history from the islands as well, and I grew up on the lake, and when you grow up on the lake becomes a part of you. And I think also, like, in the back of my mind, I also was like, oh, it'd be so great to find a camp on the lake, and and anyways, long story short, we opened communication about this property. It wasn't really on the market, and yeah, we kind of dove into it.
Right.
Yeah.
That's fantastic. Well, have you yet regretted doing what you're doing and wish that you actually had started that ice cream business?
No, not at all. No,
Okay, great.
definitely no regrets. I mean, life has gotten very chaotic. We still talk about maybe, when the wine business is more established, maybe still making ice cream, it can be a
Nice.
side
All
hustle.
right. So you're
Rob
gonna
was the primary ice cream maker, and he was making some pretty darn good ice cream. So I'm not
Ooh.
ruling ice cream out, but we are loving what we're doing in wine.
Okay. I mean, it can always be an added value. Just you just you'll just add some little Jersey cows to the mix, and you're
Right.
good to go.
Right. There we go. I know. Well, I do love cows. We have sheep. I want cows.
Yes. Well, that was gonna be my next question. I'm guessing with a veterinary background. I'm curious about that. Like, I know that you have sheep and that you have 23 of them. And
Yes.
well, is there a specific number, or does that flock expand and contract over the years? Or
That flock definitely expands and contracts.
okay,
So
so you
like we're at the vineyard beginning of our vineyard and winemaking journey. We're also at the beginning of our sheep journey for sure.
yes, yeah,
But basically, so even before the vineyard, when Rob and I moved back to Vermont, we had like an obsession with getting sheep. I'm not quite sure exactly where that comes from. My parents had sheep when I was a baby, and there's lots of baby pictures. So I think I was obsessed with that. But
got it, yeah.
anyways, when we bought our first house here, it was like 10 acres, but it was in a neighborhood association, and we made the association like vote on whether or not we could have sheep because that was so important to us. So the sheep goes back, but the desire for sheep. Anywho, when we purchased the vineyard and I started learning about, that people incorporate sheep into their vineyard, I was like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. So
Right.
that was, started reading and learning about, the values of having sheep in the vineyard. And so the first year that we had sheep, we got 4 of them with the plan to get them in the spring and slaughter them in the fall. So our
Uh-huh.
vineyard is about an hour away from our winery. So we live on the vineyard
Okay.
in the summer
Oh, that's right. Okay.
and farm it ourselves. And then in the winter, we move back to Stowe, Vermont, which is the area we were kind of established in before we bought the vineyard.
Got it.
And we
Okay.
also, but when we initially purchased the vineyard, we didn't purchase the house on the vineyard. We bought an Airstream trailer and lived in that for the first 2 summers that we
I saw that
farmed.
on the website. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
I saw yeah, that looked fun.
Yeah,
All
it
right.
was fun. I look back and it's a little crazy. We had 3 kids, including a
Yeah, that's
newborn, 2
amazing.
dogs, 2
That's
cats.
amazing.
There's lots of stories, but so we, basically we didn't have like a home here, in the winter. So when we purchased the vineyard, we also we basically built our winery out of our basement in Stowe.
Got it.
So that's where
Okay.
our production space has been, and will stand for some time probably.
Right. Is that
Um,
where you do tastings as well? Is that where
so the tasting room is actually on the vineyard. So we have a seasonal tasting
Okay.
room on the vineyard. that's
Got
open about 10, 12 weeks in the summer. Last winter, we did a pop-up tasting room out of a cool space in a hotel in Stowe. So we did like
Oh,
another
nice.
10-week pop-up to kind of try on for size what it felt like to run a tasting room in Stowe. The potential progression could be building a tasting room there, or maybe even
Right.
building, a winery outside of our basement and a tasting
Right.
room. But that's still, we're not in a rush to do that. I think that's one thing we learned from running the tasting room last winter. We're juggling a lot right now, and our production space is working for us currently. But that could be the future. Maybe things will move to the vineyard. We're still figuring all of that out.
Is the advantage of having it out on the vineyard would be the sort of idyllic setting,
Right.
but the advantage of being in Stowe would be people and
Yes,
like proximity
exactly.
to people.
Exactly. No, I mean, even though the transition between the two locations can be, a little challenging, especially with three kids. But, in some ways the setup is great because, the Lake Champlain Islands, while they are just so gorgeous, they do kind of shut down in the winter months. And,
Mm,
Stowe is just always busy. So
right.
it actually, that the setup that, kind of happened organically, I think works well and has been helpful to launch our business. Most of our friends and our kids, friends, parents, like a lot of them are small business owners, and it's a really great community, both in Grand Island and Stowe, but it's been helpful having those connections and starting a new business. So, but going back to sheep, which is where we were starting.
Yes.
So my uncle is also a vet, and he used to always he had this farmer up in the Northeast Kingdom where he would get his sheep get his lawnmowers in the spring, and then have his meat in the fall. And that was the plan.
Oh,
And we only started with 4 as kind of like a pilot project, but then of course our kids named them all, and we have this
there goes the
small barn in Stowe. So I was like, well, there's only 4. We can move them back. And of the initial 4, there were 3 boys and a girl. And I was like, well, we'll probably have a baby, and that would be cool for the kids. So we kept the initial the initial flock,
okay.
and so we had our first lamb the first winter, and then the next year we felt that we had things dialed enough that we added 10 more lambs. So we had a flock of 15 last year. And what we enjoyed, having the lamb the first year, and having sheep in Stowe, we really enjoy as well. So what we did last year is we had 15 sheep, which is too many sheep for us to bring back to Stowe. So basically we slaughtered about half the sheep for meat. And then the other half we kept, I think, 4 females last year. We ended up with 6 babies. So we lambed 6 ourselves last year. And then we added on to that again. So now we're up to 23. I think, between 20 and 30 is probably the size of flock that we can handle right now. So we're thinking this year that we'll keep enough females. We probably can't keep more than 10 sheep. We'll probably keep about 8 females that will probably replenish our flock ourselves. We find that when we lamb ourselves, like the sheep are much easier to manage because they know us. So that's kind of the progression that's happened. So yes, there is some shrinking and growing of the flock that occurs naturally.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's great. And so can you talk a little bit about, well, let me ask you a logistical question. Are there bridges that get you out to the island? You don't have to ferry
Yeah,
out.
there's like a land bridge that gets you from the mainland onto South Hero
Okay.
Island. And then kind of moving into North Hero, there's like a drawbridge there. So it's like
Okay.
they're real islands.
L-
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
um are you incorporating any other animals besides sheep
Uh,
yet?
not yet, really. I would say our dogs are very helpful.
Yeah, for
Yeah,
sure.
but they're not, our one dog, Telly, I think she's the huge reason we don't have issues with deer. And like I have this huge garden
Oh,
and we don't have any creatures eating any of the food. And I just think it's because the dogs are around all of the time.
oh,
If you don't
fantastic.
ask her to come in at night, she is very happy sitting on a sofa on the porch and just keeping watch out on
Right.
her vineyard.
Oh, fantastic. All right. Well, that's
Yeah,
so I was going to ask about the deer because I noticed that from your video. Yeah, I really love that video. I wanted to like point that out for anybody to check out your Instagram channel of just how you're managing the sort of understory that would, if left unmanaged, just encroach on your vineyard and become
right.
a huge, you know, like weed management
Yeah,
essentially
disease
project for
reservoir
you.
and
Yeah, like,
yeah,
so you're I mean, it's such like that before and after is so striking that it shows exactly how useful and how wonderful sheep can be,
totally.
when managed appropriately. I mean, they're getting all that wonderful stuff that is just turning them into these happy, delicious creatures, and then
Yeah.
they're managing the story that understory that causes problems for you, and it opens it up the landscape, it opens up the health of that that edge there, so
Right.
that you have better flow. And um are I know it was like an old vineyard and it probably wasn't designed for integration of livestock, but do you have to keep them out of the vineyard once bud break happens? How do you deal with all that?
Yeah. So, what I think is so cool and exciting is that we're getting to figure out how to deal with all that. There's no, no one really knows. We we are finding that we try to keep them in the vines as much as possible in the early season. So starting like mid-April is I think when we got them in this year. I don't they do nibble on things, but when buds are broken, I'm not really too worried about it. They actually will like sucker the trunks of the vines for us, which is super helpful. Unless we're
Oh,
really trying to like renew trunks, I think the benefit of having them there is way outweighs kind of some of the risks that they pose having them in the vineyard.
well, what is the trellis system that you have
Right. So
for the vine?
it's we're kind of in a unique situation in the Northeast where many people are growing hybrid grapes, and a lot of hybrid grapes are trellis to high wire as opposed to
Right,
VSP.
right.
So yeah, so we're naturally there. Basically the wire is around like 5-6 feet, or between like 4 and 6 feet, I'd say. So it's big sheep can reach up to the high wire, and something about our vineyard, which is still a long work in progress, is we sit on a really shallow bedrock of limestone. In some areas of the vineyard we can't even dig down like 2.5 feet. So
Wow.
our trellising system was in a lot of disarray when we purchased the vineyard, which we put a lot of work into straightening things out and digging a lot of holes. I can't take much credit for the work. My employees and Rob more so, but I think it's a unique part of our vineyard, but definitely not all of our trellis posts are straight. So, we've had some. It's a learning curve. We've had some situations where we've gotten sheep in an area where the trellis post was leaning, and so they got up and maybe did some damage to a vine, or a vine came off the kind of fell off because a sheep was rubbing its butt on it. And so there's definitely, you can have some losses, but we are in this situation where we are trellising things up higher, and so there's an opportunity to have sheep in the vines longer than if you have VSP. So I'm
Sure.
really
Yeah.
interested in keeping them in as long as possible. Once the shoots start growing really long, and there's a lot of fruit, I get a little nervous about
Yeah.
um, the losses. We did have them in there during veraison last year for a little bit, and then I kind of pulled them out of there pretty quickly because they were starting to do a little more damage. But yeah, so we're
Yeah.
figuring all this out. A system
Yeah.
to move the sheep around the vineyard during the growing season. When you're spraying, is another. There's a lot of questions to answer there. One of the biggest concerns about having sheep in the vineyard during when you're spraying is if you spray copper. So copper is an organic
Hmm.
spray. We do like a micro dose of copper as part of our biodynamic tea-based sprays. And the first year that I had the initial 4 sheep, I did a bunch of forage analysis, kind of looking at our forage before a spray, the day after a spray, a week after a spray, 2 weeks after a spray, which really would be a nice little like master's thesis that you could kind of look at
Yeah.
copper and then
That's
what's
amazing.
safe in sheep. So one of the few things I remember about sheep from vet school, I just remember this picture of this dead sheep from copper toxicity. So they're very
Oh,
sensitive to
there you
copper.
go. Wow.
So that's why I kind of was like, oh, this makes me a little nervous. We don't spray very much copper comparatively to kind of a classic organic dose, but we wanted to look into that. So we've done a little work there and, have a sense that generally if we spray copper, we don't put the sheep in until usually around 2.5, 3 weeks after that. But more work needs to be done. And, we love helping kind of begin answer those questions and figure that out. Yeah, it's a work in process. We're going to be working with some of the Vermont and maybe federal agencies to help us with some sheep fencing and really like create the most efficient kind of grazing plan possible, and doing that with our early season sprays. But it's kind of like a cool problem to solve.
Yeah.
It's been fun for both Rob and I.
Oh, I like that. I mean, can you talk more about what some of those solutions are that you're proposing? I mean, how that would work?
Yeah, I mean, we're just trying to. So what we're going to try to do, so a big part of moving sheep around during the growing season is just the labor of like moving the fencing. So we use electric netting.
Right.
What
I
we're
mean,
oh, go ahead.
I don't think anybody on this podcast has sort of described that in detail, but I wouldn't mind if you wouldn't mind,
Yeah,
like
electric.
talking about what that actual labor looks like. So I mean, I'm familiar with it and I've seen video of it, but if you can
Yeah.
sort of like what is that chore in a step by step sort of way look
Right.
like?
So we usually build. So basically, the electric netting, which is just this kind of movable electric fencing, they're either 100 or 160 feet in length, and so we usually create a paddock of 4 of those fences, and then we generally want to set up a second paddock that they would move to. So generally, you move sheep. I mean, it depends what time of the season it is and what's going on with the forage, which is affected by the weather and the rain and everything. But in the early, you're moving sheep anywhere from every 1 to the max 4 days. So generally every 2 to 3 days, again,
Hmm.
depending on the value of, the nutritional value of the forage that they're grazing. So,
Hmm.
that takes a while. You're basically picking up, these, there's just kind of metal stakes at the end of each segment of fencing, and just picking it up and moving. And then generally we make the paddocks so they're attached, so it's pretty easy to move the sheep into the next paddock. But it's a lot of moving fences, and so we are
Right.
proposing this system where basically we would have a perimeter fence around the vineyard, which would inadvertently help with other potential issues from the outside, which would be nice. And then having an interior circular fence as well. And so then what we would do
Mm.
is those would be electrified, and then we would attach the electric netting, and we'd be able to more easily move the electric netting between kind of the interior and the exterior fence. So it would just cut down on labor and help us kind of more efficiently move them. And then if we were to spray
Mm.
copper, or need to spray copper, we would be able to very easily move them into their interior paddock, where again, they would just be able to move in there easily, and then we'd be able to get the tractor through the vineyard. So move out the
Got it.
fencing. So it just, I feel like I need to draw a picture, but
Yeah, and I guess it depends on like the layout of your vineyard too,
yes,
right?
yes, I feel
And
like a map
yeah,
would be really helpful. I don't know if this is going to come
'cause
across
the
to
way you
your
were describing
listeners,
it,
but
it sounded like a sheep moat, like you were gonna have
yeah,
like,
exactly.
is that possible? Yeah,
Totally,
okay.
totally. Yeah. I mean, imagine just kind of like two lines of fencing, and then you're basically using the electric netting kind of in between those to create paddocks. So I mean, there's still going to be some labor of moving the fences, but the idea is we can do it more efficiently. So yeah,
Right.
again, I don't have all the answers, but
Right.
we're getting more efficient at moving them and kind of understanding, their value. I mean, it's great. It's cut down on our mowing significantly. I think we only did like one mowing course in the vineyard last year. Obviously the biggest reason we're interested in the sheep is for their fertilization benefits. And I don't
Yeah.
think their hooves aerating the soil hurts anything. And
Yeah.
as you mentioned before, the work that they're doing on the outside of the vineyard, I think has been incredibly helpful this year. We have tons of invasive buckthorn and sumac that has just been like encroaching upon all the blocks of our vineyard. And it's just amazing in like one day how much they can just clear out, which would
Yeah.
be so much more man hours of labor. Um,
Yeah.
so
Is
yeah.
so how do you electrify those movable fences? Are you using batteries or solar?
We have solar. Yeah. So we have these little
Okay.
solar
And
panels.
it works regardless of your rainy
Yeah, they seem
summer
to be
weather there?
working well. I mean, we leave the sheep in the vineyard until November, and obviously daylight shrinks down significantly in Vermont by
Right.
then. But yeah, we haven't had any problems with them at all. I mean, the sheep are pretty good about staying in the fences. We don't have too many escape
Yeah,
artists.
do you I've heard of people, sort of fence training the sheep, so you put them in a place where, that you have a dedicated electrical fence when they're young, and that they bump into it a few times and they learn not to go up against
Yeah.
the
I mean, they're
fence
pretty
anymore.
good, but there's one really smart one. He's one of the original four. His name is Escapee, because when we got the first four lambs, we didn't turn on the electric fence, and he like did basically a somersault
Right.
over the fence, like when we initially got him on the property before he was grain trained. And he literally ran around Grand Isle, did this like loop, for 36 hour. I think it was, yeah, he spent 2 nights outside, and I was like mortified of like him being like eaten by coyotes. Anyways,
Right.
chasing a sheep is a fool's errand. But he's still like, when he figures out that the fence is off, and they get like anxious when they know they're about to, if they're happy, like if they have food, they don't really care about escaping. They like each other. They like to be together. They have a good life. But if they're really ready to move, like yesterday morning this happened, they get a little anxious, and if they learn that the fence is off, they'll just like, especially this one big weather that I have, he's like and he just leaps over and he does whatever he wants to do. But
It's funny. People come, I've heard, people making fun of sheep for being dumb, but it's like we probably wanted them to be that way
yeah,
so that
I
they would
mean,
be,
sheep are not dumb. They're not dumb at all.
right,
They're interesting. I
right,
mean, they just have a very strong affinity to being in a flock, which can be helpful from a
right,
management perspective, but
right.
also frustrating. Yeah, when we're
Yeah,
moving them along the forest edge, which you had alluded to before, there's not quite as much. There's this great forage that they're clearing out for us, but they go through it a lot more quickly because it's kind of this like narrow paddock, along
right.
the forest edge. So they run out of forage a lot more quickly. So they totally got out. I remember
Yeah.
it was yesterday morning, but on what's today, Wednesday, on Monday night, I was out there with them, and I was like, I really should move them today. And I had my kids. I think Rob wasn't around, and I was like, they'll be okay by the morning. And then of course, our employee
Yep.
Nick shows up, and as soon as he goes out
All
there,
night,
he's like, "We got some sheep out."
all
So
night they were planning their escape. Yep.
they were, but it's fun. I mean, I one of the things I became a veterinary oncologist, but I think one thing that I really missed. I did a lot of large animal work when I was in vet school, and I just I love farm animals. I love problem solving around them, and it's been fun to like incorporate that into our farm. And I think it's makes for a more balanced ecosystem, and helps produce a healthier farm. So all sorts of benefits: meat, wool,
Yeah.
healthier soils,
Yeah.
all the things.
Yeah,
So
that's great. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, less tractor passes for mowing.
Yep.
So the time that you mow is probably the end of the season when you kind of have to pull them out for the sake of not eating grapes and things. Is that right? And then
Yeah.
you still need to get another mow in there before harvest.
Right. Yeah. I mean, basically throughout the growing season, I scan the vineyard about, 2 or so times a week. And, we mainly, one of the, as biggest challenges of farming grapes in the Northeast is, the fact that, it's fungal disease just because we have more rain and moisture.
Right.
And the biggest things that, I'm looking at is, do we have disease pressure? Do we have airflow? And, we base our kind of grazing and mowing, based on what I'm kind of seeing in the vineyard. So we kind of address different blocks as, pressures arise or don't arise. And we are lucky we have a really great kind of natural, I think initially clover was planted as a cover crop. So there's a nice
Mm.
base there, but we've kind of let the natural flora grow, and it stays pretty under control. So I think I have to look back at our notes for this year, but we've probably done one pass of mowing in addition to what the sheep have done. But we did have to pull the sheep out fairly early because of disease pressure. We did spray copper fairly early, and so that's where we've been focusing them on the outside of the vineyard this year. So last year, I think we only sprayed copper once at the end of the season, and I think I was a little, I regretted that a little bit based on the disease pressure that we had at the end of the season. So yeah, so
Why
we're
was
finding a balance there.
So say that again? You sprayed, when did you spray? At the
So last season, so
Yeah,
I was trying to cut copper out completely so that the sheep would
okay.
be in the vineyard as long as absolutely possible,
Right.
within the vines, not just, working other areas of the land on the farm.
Yes,
And
yes, got
so we ended up doing just one copper spray at the very end of the season.
Oh,
And I feel
interesting, okay.
I feel that there was more disease pressure than I wanted. There's a little more downy and a little more black rot at the end of the season.
Gotcha,
So
yeah.
we definitely sprayed a little copper earlier this year and had to pull them out of the vineyard because of that. And then we were hoping
Yeah,
to, I kind of have this based on the forage analysis that we had done, felt comfortable throwing them back in, about 3 weeks or so after a copper spray. And we definitely still need to do more research on that. But we've had not a large volume of rain this year, but it's just been raining a little bit every day, which is not good for downy and black rot.
yeah,
And so we have been focusing their energies on the edges of the vineyard in the last month or
so that
so.
you can spray more.
Yeah, which is great, which is, also
Yeah,
helping the vineyard. So
yeah.
yeah.
Well, so, yeah, I mean, from what I understand, I know the cycle with at least powdery, and I thought downy and black rot were similar, that it's the early season sprays that actually have the most effect, even though
Right.
you won't see, the mildews develop until late in the season. It's
Yes.
actually like, dormant and like bud break
Yes.
timing for a lot of that
Right.
stuff.
Right. Which is again
Um,
why we were like, okay, we got to spray copper earlier in the season this year.
yeah, gotcha.
So yeah.
And what else do you spray?
So we basically the base of our sprays, we make horsetail and nettle tea.
Okay.
And so our spray program basically comes from La Garagista, from Deirdre Heekin and
Okay.
Caleb Barber, who have been, great mentors to me and super helpful. But yeah, basically we make horsetail and nettle tea as a base. And then we generally alternate a low dose of copper and then sulfur. We're limiting some sulfur use just because these hybrids are pretty sensitive to it. We don't spray
Oh,
sulfur on our Louise Swenson vines at all. We also use a little bit of some of the newer organic, the kind of natural plant immune system boosters. So Regalia and Lifeguard as well.
gotcha.
Yeah, we're
Yeah,
kind of
from
hoping they would
Verona, yeah.
replace copper, but I think, unfortunately, I think copper is one of the strongest tools we have against
Yeah,
at
well,
least black
yeah.
rot and downy, which are around. But I mean, so far so good. So we kind of check the disease pressure and then base our spray based on that. But those are the main tools we use. We also spray clay to help with insect control as well.
Okay.
And we usually spray at the beginning of the season. We do biodynamic, we do 500, and then sometimes 501 later in the season. Yeah,
Okay. Got it. Great. Thanks for that. And you brought up Louise Swenson
yeah,
as one of your grapes. Can you talk about that one? And then also, I know it's funny because that came up in another recent Vermont interview that I did,
yeah,
which I think you listened to.
yeah.
And any corrections you want to make, because I think you were called out in that, feel free to say. But love to hear about your grapes. Essentially,
Yeah.
it's funny. I knew. I mean, I got a response to that last one that somebody actually is really interested in Louise Swenson. At
Oh,
least one
cool.
person out there
That's
is.
great.
So,
Yeah.
anything you want to say about it?
Yeah,
Like its
sure.
pros,
So,
cons, flavors, every
right.
characteristics, everything. Yeah.
Sure. We haven't planted since we purchased the vineyard, but there's 6 varieties that we have. So we've got 3 whites and 3 reds. So Louise Swenson
Okay.
is one of the whites, Prairie Star, and then La Crescent. Those are the 3 whites, and then we have
Okay.
Marquette, Frontenac Noir, and Saint Croix. Um, so regarding Louise Swenson, I don't know why I'm calling her a she. I guess because her name is Louise, but it's she's a tough grape and a finicky grape. I don't know how
Okay.
to.
Okay.
It takes a long time. My understanding, what I've seen, what I've heard, for her to really become the vines to really become established. Some of our older
Mm.
vines are Louise Swenson, and they're produce very well, and
No.
they do great. There's some younger Louise Swenson vines on the vineyard that are finally kind of just like, I feel like, getting a foothold and producing more and looking a lot healthier. We also, all of our Louise Swenson was on VSP when we purchased the vineyard, so
Oh.
low wire, and we have transitioned them over the last couple of years up to high wire, which I think they look so much healthier now.
Okay.
There's definitely some research out there with hybrids, and that many of the different varieties will crop better on high wire. And certainly you're dealing
Yeah.
with less splash, fungal disease splash
Yeah.
on the low wire.
Are you? Are you? Is that cane or spur pruning when
So
it's on the high wire?
we've transitioned the whole vineyard to cane pruning.
Yeah, that just seems like a lot better for the fungal
Yes,
pressure as
definitely. And that
well because you're
was our
getting rid of all
thought.
the old wood.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's been a process removing a lot of old wood.
Yeah.
But every year pruning gets easier because, I mean, there's certainly, I don't know if there's maybe like a handful of vines that, have still had to be spur pruned, but whenever we can, we cane prune. We're starting to renew a lot of trunks as well. I'm noticing a lot of like old trunk disease. Um,
Mm.
so so I'll cane pruned. But Louise makes a very light bodied, very pleasant wine. It's definitely has like aromas like fresh, like young pineapple is what I always get on the nose.
Oh.
It has kind of this like herbaceous pininess to it that I think
Mm.
I find that it is somewhat polarizing of a grape. So
Mm.
we make a straight, this year in 2021, we added 10% Prairie Star to it. It's Louise is the name of the wine. It was 100% Louise. And now we added 10% Prairie Star this last year, but just to kind of round it out and give it a little more body. But it is like some people who come taste our wines, like favorite wine, they love it. But I also think there's kind of this like, I don't know if herbaceous is the right word to use, but there's some flavor profile that is not quite familiar, I think, to all wine drinkers that some
Yeah.
people don't love. But I think it can be a very nice wine. I'm very happy with our Louise from 2021. So I don't know if that
Nice.
helps, but
Yeah, no, that's great. Okay, so Prairie Star and La Crescent. So
yes.
those are your whites. Are you are what's your favorite one of those in terms of like just ease and beautiful grapes and all that kind of stuff? Like, what would you plant
Definitely
more of?
Prairie Star.
Okay.
Prairie Star is, I think, my favorite. I have like a love-hate relationship with La Crescent.
Okay.
Everyone makes fun of the fact that for a
Do
while,
tell.
while
Do
I was
tell.
saying that I hated La Crescent, but I don't hate La Crescent. I just feel like La Crescent is like over the top with aromatics. Like it is,
Gotcha.
um, it's just very intense. And I think our La Crescent is very unique and intense too. And I think the first year that we made wine from it, I guess it was the second year when we made commercial wine. The initial wine that we made, the acidity was like so biting. Like I think the TA on the initial finished wine was like 14, or I can't remember. It was like, it was
Wow.
just so acidic, but actually that wine settled into itself, and people loved that wine. We're basically sold out
Wow.
of it
Yeah.
now, but
Nice.
yeah, so I kind of like struggled with the intensity of La Crescent. So my favorite white wine that we make is a co-ferment of 50% La Crescent and 50% Prairie Star. So Prairie Star is much less aromatic, more subtle aromatics. It definitely kind of, as it ripens, like you get like lychee fruit and some tropical aromas, and it's really beautiful, but much more subtle. And I mean, what people told me about, I feel like no one knows anything about Prairie Star, but when we initially bought the vineyard, people were like, "Oh, Prairie Star is a blending grape," and I was like, "Okay, what does that mean?" Mix it with your Louis Swenson. But I think it's I would say a full bodied white, and that's why it is nice for blending.
Right.
But one of my favorite wines that we make, we started making in 2019, is called Regeneration 7, and it's just 100% Prairie Star Pet Nat, and it is just so lovely. It's just so
Mm.
balanced, and I'm not sure if we'll ever make a still Prairie Star, but it is really cool, as a pet nat, and I love it blended with La Crescent. Like they just balance each other out really nicely.
Nice.
Yeah.
All right. What about your reds again? Can you re-mention those?
So Saint Croix is
Okay.
about just over a third of the vineyard is Saint Croix or Saint Croix, depending on who you
Uh-huh.
talk to. Um,
How how good or
so
bad your French is. Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, I'd say Saint Croix is probably one of my favorite grapes on the vineyard. It's also
Yeah.
a big pain in the butt to work with. It has super duper thin skins. It
Mm.
is the first thing that we harvest. The bricks generally you don't want them to climb much more than like 22 max, or
Okay.
the fruit
Yeah.
just starts to like fall apart.
Right.
Because the skins are so thin, they just start like tearing away from the rachis, and you get, fruit flies and
Wow.
wasps
Oh.
and ladybugs and all the things. But
Yeah.
I think it's a more balanced red wine, compared to like Marquette and Frontenac, who I
Okay.
think have lovely qualities as well. But I think it just makes a really cool wine. So we make a rosé from Saint Croix, a still rosé, and then we make excuse me, sorry, getting over a summer cold.
All right.
We also make a still red, La Coutinelle La Guêpe, which means the ladybug. My French is terrible, so sorry. But it means the
Mine too.
ladybug and the wasp. And so that's named for kind of named around kind of the labor of love that it is to harvest it. But it makes a really
Mm.
beautiful still red, light bodied red wine. So, yeah. So yeah, Saint Croix and then Marquette, You want more on Saint Croix? I can keep going.
um, well, I'm no, I mean, I think that's okay. That's good. Go ahead, keep going on whatever. Go. I mean, I was going to ask you about Marquette. I mean, how old is your vineyard?
So the initial vineyard was planted in 2001.
Okay.
They
Okay.
lost the initial vines though to a catastrophic hailstorm in '03. So basically our oldest
Oof.
vines now are 2005. So our
Okay.
vines are anywhere between, the bulk of it was 2005, 2006, but there were also some back blocks planted in 2010 and 11. So
I was going to say, I
yeah.
didn't think Marquette had been around commercially that long. Is it from the original planting? I
Yeah,
mean,
the
from
Marquette
okay.
was planted, I think, in '06. And there's
Okay.
definitely some old Marquette, like I would say Shelburne Vineyard and Lincoln Peak Vineyards Marquette is older than ours. And
Right.
I don't know about Snow Farm is the other larger vineyard that was planted in the late '90s, and Boyden
Okay.
too. Um,
Yeah.
so they definitely have some older Marquette too. Yeah, so people know Marquette for being a cousin to Pinot Noir, but I always tell people it tastes nothing like Pinot Noir, in my opinion.
Yeah. No, definitely does
But
not.
all the reds are super inky and so much pigment, like the opposite of
Yeah.
Pinot Noir,
Yeah.
right? So yeah, I mean, Marquette is, I mean, it's got tons of fruit. You know, I feel like hybrids always get knocked for like having no tannin, and definitely it's not high in tannin, but I think you can get some beautiful tannin in Marquette.
Mm.
And yeah, so we make a still red called Barbara Ann from the Marquette, and we make a Pet Nat Rosé called Renewal M, which is super yummy. Just like luscious, like early spring berries, and it's really smooth and cool.
Mm.
But yeah, I mean, we make about 20 different wines every year. So we make a lot of
Yeah.
different wines. And that kind of
Uh,
started just like we're both my husband and I are scientists. And, the first year we made wine, we were like, okay,
so
well, we
quick.
have to make a still wine from each,
Uh-huh.
from each variety. And then, of course, then the second year we're like, oh, we had ideas on, co-ferments. We've done like a co-ferment of our three whites and a co-ferment of our three reds. And then, we of course had some, the first year we weren't super happy with the Le Crescent or the Prairie Star by itself. And that was kind of the birth of Asters and Clover, which is the still white that I mentioned to you. And then
Uh-huh.
again, the second year we started to make wine, we're like, well, we should try to pet nat everything and see, how that tastes. And so there's another six wines. But of course, they didn't, uh, those kind of evolved because a lot of our fermentations ran dry before we had a chance to bottle. So then we like blended in, sugar that we had in the winery. So some of our pet nats, a lot of them are like 85. One of them, like our Regeneration 2, is 85% Louise Swenson and 15% Marquette, because we really wanted to make that pet nat, and we added in the Marquette, and it's such a cool, lovely combo that we've continued to make
Mm.
that. So basically, we've just continued to do experiments every year. We're trying not to exceed 20 wines a year, but it's just super fun. Like, we just
This is
love,
what happens when you put two scientists in a
yeah,
winery together,
right, right.
right?
Yeah, I mean, what's so cool about what I love about growing wine in Vermont and in the Northeast and all these, hybrid varieties, that was just very little is known about how to grow them, how to vinify them. But it's kind of like, I remember when I first took that viticulture class, like just learning about all these different varieties, and like the possibilities are endless. Like no one really knows what the best grapes to grow here are, because it's just a wine industry in its infancy, right? And I just love the idea of like experimenting with different grapes and then experimenting with different winemaking techniques. And so, I mean, our goal is to just make the best wine that we can with the grapes that we have. And, we've just kind of adopted the philosophy of like minimal intervention, and, the results have been good so far. It's just fun. So, yeah.
That's great. Yeah.
I kind
I mean, it's interesting to hear how much, even with the hybrids, you pretty much need to treat them. I mean, you need to spray them pretty regularly anyway.
Yeah.
It sounds like,
Yeah, I
it's
think
not.
so. I
I mean,
mean, I think you can definitely do less. I mean, but
yeah,
yeah, you have to pay attention for sure.
yeah. Well, I can't imagine if you were trying to grow vinifera what it would be like.
Right,
Um,
right, right. No,
yeah.
I mean, I have a good friend, and he's a mentor. He owns a winery in Quebec, and he grows mainly vinifera, and I mean, we have this great relationship, and I just took him to the vineyard in the early spring, and he's like, oh, we don't have to be as anal with the ground management. We don't, like with there is some
Right.
flexibility, that I think he
Right.
saw that
Right.
we have. But, you still have to pay attention. I mean, we still have to get in there and pick out, black rod and downy, and, there's a lot of handwork, there's a lot of spray work, there's, all the things, but
Yeah.
there might be a little more flexibility there for sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Great. Um, Well, speaking of all these wines, I know from having, a few, like not even half of what you have, it is such a pain in the butt to make labels and get labels approved for all these. And then to think of it ahead of time so that when bottling comes around, you're not like, oh crap, like there's a month lead time to get to,
Oh yeah.
the
Oh yeah.
designer and the printer and
Yes.
approval.
Oh,
And
story of
we
my
need to bottle
life.
next week. Yeah. But having said all that, your labels are gorgeous. They're just
Thank you.
really beautiful, beautiful labels. And what's the story behind that? The artwork on those?
Yeah, it's been a super fun process. So I had this vision initially for the labels to create an basically a pattern that incorporates like features of the vineyard flora and fauna for each variety. And
Hmm.
the inspiration is the idea of kind of like a vintage wallpaper, which was like my passion project with my second son. I wanted to create a
Ah,
world map on his like nursery wall with
hmm.
and find like vintage wallpaper and have like each continent be a different pattern. So we did that. I had a very artistic friend who helped me. She basically, I bought the wallpaper and came up with the idea, but she executed, which which I just loved. And we ended up selling that house, and I just like loved that idea. And so that kind of inspired the labels to kind of bring that forth and make it more personal. So I worked with a
Gotcha.
designer, Andrew Dernovich. He's out of Essex, Vermont. He's amazing. And I'd never really worked with a designer before. And like, to try to like have someone execute your like brainchild is kind of this crazy process, but he was so good and professional. But yeah, we worked on these patterns together, and we tried to even kind of get geeky about like the characteristics of the wine and the vines in the vineyard, and try to like incorporate again flora and fauna into those patterns. So you'll see that our still Marquette has this kind of red pattern with a deer on it, and I think a raccoon and a fox, and
Yeah.
then our like red co-ferment, which has Marquette, Saint Croix, and Frontenac, has all three of those varieties patterns kind of ripped across the label. And the same thing for our
Yes.
co-ferment of our white wine. So yeah, it's just kind of fun. And then we get like really geeky with the sparkling wines and how we kind of like subtly incorporate those patterns into the labels. Our first pet nat line, which is our regeneration series, that kind of strays a little bit, but it's also like a repeating sheep pattern.
Right.
And each different wine, we just numbered them, but has like a different colored sheep in a different area of the label. It's just kind of fun. So
Yeah.
pet nats are
Yeah.
fun, so we made that a little more fun. But yeah, no, it's been
So
like such a fun process
All right, so you're creating that artwork
So
yourself?
our designer, I mean, so it's
Okay,
been
your
like a
design. Yeah,
process with the designer. No, I give Andrew
got
all
it,
the
got it, got it.
credit.
Got it, got it. Okay, so your
Yeah,
designer, right?
yeah,
So I was
like a
gonna
back
say, so
and
you have a
forth between
designer.
us, but
You're not working on Photoshop
oh my God,
and
no. Oh
everything
my
else. No.
God, I'm
Okay.
computer, no, challenged. No,
Yeah, I
he's
was
doing
like
all that
I
crazy
was like,
work.
you could have a whole third career if you wanted
No,
to.
no,
Yeah.
no, no more, no more. um,
Uh, yeah, I've got business for you.
no, contact Andrew Jernovich. He's amazing.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Awesome. Well, what could you do you want to give your social media and website stuff and things like that where people can learn more, buy wine, and
Yeah.
join the fun?
Yeah, absolutely. So we're pretty active on Instagram. It's at Ellison Estate Vineyard, and Facebook, just Ellison Estate Vineyard. Um, our website is www.eevwine.com. Or Ellison Estate Vineyard's very long. You can type that out as well. But you can find information about our wines there. So um, we sell directly in Vermont through our tasting room right now, but when that closes, we definitely sell wine direct by appointment. We are also at a lot of local establishments in Stowe and Burlington, and there's a list of most of those on our website. It's growing. But we also ship to 37 states. So that's an option as well. And we have a wine club called
Fantastic.
Flock for our sheep, named for our sheep. So we ship wine club as well. And then we have a wine club in Vermont. You can pick up the wine club locally in Vermont at Wilder Wines, but we also do a lot of cool, we try to make it more than just a bottle club and do a lot of really cool pickup events and for our members. So yeah, that's kind of where you can get the wine and different
Fantastic.
options to
Yeah.
get the wine. So yeah,
Well, as a closing question, I guess for you, we didn't really talk about your winemaking, but you say on your website that you're really very minimal, essentially making natural wine.
yep.
Might add a little bit of sulfur, probably to the still wines. I'm guessing at bottling.
Yes.
Um, do you what inspired that? Like what inspired your approach to that? I mean, obviously you studied at La Garagiste, so that your mentoring was probably in that vein, but
Yeah,
was there
no.
anything else behind your philosophy of winemaking that
Yeah,
is
no, I
reflected
mean,
there?
we really kind of again leaped into this, but our first conversation, before we bought the vineyard, we sat down with Deirdre and Caleb, and the advice that they gave us was just get some wine, crush it, let it ferment, see what happens, and kind of go from there. And we really just kind of did that. We
Yeah.
have never, used any yeast. We kind of let the process happen naturally. And I remember when we first when we first got our first crepes into our basement, it was like totally empty. And I just remember Rob and I being up in the middle of the night and looking at each other and be like, we have no clue what we're doing. but we stomped on the grape. We, decided, how much to destem based on taste. We stomped on the grapes and the fermentation happened. And I remember the very first fermentation that we did. I just remember getting these like crazy aromas of ethyl acetate. And I was like, oh my God, we're
Yeah.
making nail polish remover. This is horrible. Like, what are we doing? And I remember reaching out to, Todd Traskos. I remember emailing him and Deirdre being like, what do I do? What do I do? And everyone was like, just be patient. I think that was the best advice that I ever got because those aromas blew off, and we were able to create some really great wines. So it just has kind of worked out that way. Like I don't think we went into this being dogmatic that we were going to just do natural wine, but I'm so glad we got that advice and followed that path because I think it's makes for better wine, and it's the right way to make wine. So yeah, it's been great.
That's great. Yeah, I had a conversation with somebody last night, and I was just describing the process, and I was like, well, grapes are constantly changing. You're just stepping in and really helping to guide them towards delicious changes rather
Right.
than not delicious
Right.
changes, you know?
Right. Absolutely.
And like, I love the idea that it's just like the role of those of us who are, in that position of like taking the grapes from the vineyard into a bottle you're not really making wine. You're just like guiding the change
Right.
in that direction.
Yeah, definitely.
um
No, and
yeah.
I think just the one, again, we had zero formal or very minimal formal training. I mean, I took a couple UC Davis courses, and I did, I've done some things, since we started this all, but I mean, really, advice from my friend Matthew up in Quebec, and from Deirdre, and Ethan Joseph at Shelburne Vineyards has also been incredibly helpful, especially with a lot of vineyard stuff from the very beginning. But just kind of trusting in my palate, and that was something that,
Mm.
I think fortunately, I had developed, over time. And I think that's really the most important thing. Like you said, you're just guiding the process. And we definitely made some really crappy wine that first year too,
Yeah, no, that it happens.
It happens.
Bad wine
It
happens
happens.
for sure. Yeah,
I think,
especially when you're taking
yeah,
those
you
risks,
learn that you
yeah.
actually have to really pay attention. That was the biggest thing I
Yeah.
learned that first year.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I think, I still kind of like pinch myself, like every vintage, I'm like, oh God, was it a mistake? Like, am I going to be able to make a good wine again? But so far it seems to be repeatable. But yeah, it's great.
Oh,
It's
amazing.
such a great process, and we really enjoy it. So
All right. Awesome. Well, fun. Well, thank you so much for talking
of
about this.
course.
It's great to learn about you, and I think it sounds like such a cool thing that you're doing. It sounds like there's another little Lake District wine country that's happening
Yeah,
in New England. So
definitely.
you guys will be the pioneers one day.
Yeah, we'll see.
Well, thanks again. Thanks so much, Kendra. It's been great talking to you.
Yeah, great talking to you too. Thank you.
Thanks so much for listening. I really hope you enjoyed this as much as I did. And if you did, please do leave a review for the Organic Wine Podcast. It helps a lot, and we want to get the word out to as many people as we can, which your review will help do. Thanks so much.